Let's picture it. You've just landed that dream co-op, you've won that huge scholarship, or you're walking in on your first day at a big new job. You know what skill is going to follow you everywhere and basically define your success? Mastering change. We're talking new tech, new teams, new rules. It's constant. And if you can understand how people react to it and why, you are always going to stand out. So let's dive into how you can make that your superpower.
Okay, so let's get personal for a second. Think about a big change that's on your horizon. Maybe it's a new project, a move to a new city, or even just getting used to new software at work. What is your gut reaction? Do you feel that little knot of dread in your stomach? Or do you feel a spark of excitement? That first instinct, that's at the very heart of everything we're about to explore.
And that gut reaction leads us straight to this huge problem that every organization faces. I call it the change paradox. On one hand, any business that wants to survive has to constantly innovate. It's just the rule of the game. But on the other hand, our brains, well, they're kind of hardwired to love what's comfortable and familiar. And this tension, this gap between needing to change and wanting to stay the same, is pretty much the #1 reason that brilliant new strategies end up failing.
So if we're going to solve that paradox, we have to start by decoding our own reactions. Why is it that we sometimes fear change and other times we totally embrace it? Let's break down what's really going on under the hood.
You know, it's actually way simpler than you might think. People fear change when they expect to lose something. Maybe it's a loss of control over their work, a loss of status, or even just losing a comfortable, predictable routine. But on the flip side, we embrace change when we see an opportunity, a chance to get better results, to learn something new, or maybe to step into a role that feels more like, well, us. It all boils down to that one simple question. What's in it for me? Is it a loss, or is it an opportunity?
So this table really shows how those internal feelings, those drivers, actually show up as behaviors you can see. For example, if someone's afraid of losing control, they might actively resist. We're talking complaints, maybe even sabotage. And look right there in the middle, ambivalence. That's driven by a lack of whiffum. You know, what's in it for me? And what does that look like? Usually just silence. But when people start to see an opportunity, they move down the chart and they actually become champions for the change. The key takeaway here is huge. Attitude isn't just a feeling, it's an action.
To really get a handle on this journey, there's a classic model we can look at, the Kubler-Ross change curve. Now, this was originally developed to explain the stages of grief, but it turns out it's a perfect map for that emotional roller coaster we all ride during any big change. It's a great reminder that our reactions are almost always emotional first and rational second.
And here's what that roller coaster ride looks like. First up, denial. Nah, this new policy won't last. Then comes anger. This is ridiculous. They didn't even ask us. That's followed by bargaining, where you try to find a little workaround. After that, there's often a low point, depression, as the reality of the change really sinks in. And then finally, you get to acceptance. Now, a leader's job isn't to stop these stages from happening, because they will, but to guide people through them with empathy and speed, helping them get from resistance to resolution.
Okay, so the change curve helps us react to all those emotions. But what if we could get ahead of them? This brings us to the leader's playbook, how to shift from just reacting to change to proactively leading it.
And our playbook comes from a guy named John Kotter, who made this totally revolutionary argument. He said that resistance to change isn't a problem with your people, it's a symptom of a flawed process. His 8-step model isn't about managing fear after it shows up. It's about designing a process that creates enthusiasm and embrace from the very beginning. It's a total game changer.
Now check this out. Look at how these first 4 steps directly attack the attitudes we just talked about. First, you create urgency to completely shatter that initial denial. Then you build a team of influential champions to get that early buy-in. Third, you form a super clear strategic vision. This is how you answer that what's in it for me question and calm the fear of the unknown. And finally, you enlist volunteers to turn people who are just passively going along into active champions. See? Every single step is designed to build momentum before resistance can even get a foothold.
So all that's the theory. It sounds good on paper, right? But how does this stuff actually play out in the real world? Let's look at 2 massive corporate transformations where this theory became a reality.
So we've got 2 incredible stories here. On one side, you have the Canadian giant Loblaw merging with Shoppers Drug Mart, a massive $12 billion structural change that had to combine 2 very, very different cultures. And on the other side, you have Microsoft, which had to completely overhaul a toxic, combative internal culture that was seriously holding it back. 2 completely different challenges, both handled brilliantly. So how in the world did Loblaw avoid a massive culture clash? Well, they absolutely nailed Kotter's third step, form a strategic vision. Their new vision wasn't about groceries or pharmacies. It was this new, bigger idea of health, beauty, and wellness. This gave everyone, from both companies, a new shared identity to rally around. It's a perfect example of how a powerful vision can give people a reason to embrace the future, instead of just fearing the loss of their old identity. Now let's switch over to Microsoft. When Satya Nadella took over as CEO, he had to break through decades of denial and, frankly, complacency. He did it with Kotter's very first step, create a sense of urgency. And this quote, this wasn't just some nice line for a press release. It was a direct challenge to the entire company. The message was crystal clear. We either change or we become irrelevant.
But here's the critical part. Nadella didn't just talk about change. He changed the very system that was creating the bad attitudes in the first place. He got rid of something called stack ranking, which was this performance review system that forced managers to rank their employees against each other. It basically created a brutal internal Hunger Games. By abolishing it, he made collaboration not just possible but necessary. He didn't just ask for a new culture, he engineered the conditions for it to actually grow.
Okay, this is all fascinating stuff, but how can you apply these lessons? Let's put together your own personal change toolkit so you can turn all this theory into real-world action.
All right, here are 3 core principles you have to remember. First, attitude is a clue. If you see resistance, don't just blame the person, look at the process. Because a bad process almost always creates bad attitudes. Second, never forget that change is emotional. You have to connect with people's hearts, not just their minds. And third, treat resistance like it's valuable data. It's not just a roadblock, it's a roadmap that's telling you exactly what you need to fix.
And here is your practical hands-on checklist. You can literally use this tomorrow. First, always start by asking, what do people think they could lose here? And what could they gain? Second, explain the why behind the change, not just the what. People need purpose. Third, give people time and space to practice and adapt to new skills. And finally, find and celebrate the small early wins. Nothing builds momentum like the feeling of making progress.
So let's end with a look to the future. The next great wave of change is already here, generative AI. It's a technology that's going to reshape not just our tasks, but maybe even how we think and create. So here's the question for you. Will you and the leaders around you frame it as replacement, which will trigger fear and resistance? Or will you frame it as augmentation, a co-pilot that makes us all better, inspiring embrace and innovation? How you answer that question? Well, that's going to define the next chapter of your career.